Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rick Rossi. I'm CISA's cybersecurity advisor, assigned to New Hampshire. Honest kind of just one check is we feel overwhelmed a little bit with cybersecurity and just the complexity, or is everybody like, this is just great? I feel really comfortable. Anybody?
You just say there's overly burdens.
Okay. Any other feelings out there? So we just heard about getting consultants. You've got a consultant sitting in front of you that's not charging you anything. So let's make the most out of this. So I'll talk a little bit about Cybersecurity Awareness Month and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So my role with CISA serves as a cybersecurity advisor assigned to the state of New Hampshire. We have individuals in all 50 states. We also have folks that cover physical security as well. We are a free resource from the federal government, free consultants. So, if you're looking at, hey, where do I even start? I don't know what to do. This is overwhelming. You're welcome to reach out. Anything we can do to help, we're willing to on both physical and cybersecurity. The overall agency mission, though, is looking at things from the critical infrastructure side of things. So when we talk about critical infrastructure, rightfully so, most minds go to power generation and water and transportation and internet service providers. But small businesses really play a pretty major role in that. The number of small businesses that were just critical during the COVID-19 pandemic in New Hampshire I never would have guessed prior to that. When we talk about defense manufacturing, the number of small businesses that produce a very small, unique part or product that is used in a much grander scheme for defense purposes. Again, just don't want to understate the criticality of small business, and that's recognized as well. So our overall goal is to ensure that critical infrastructure within the U.S. is resilient. And what we mean by that is, you can do everything textbook. You can have all the products, great IT team. And when we talk about something like 0 days, software supply chain attacks, you can still have a really bad day. So how fast do you get back online? Have we explored, what is the critical service that we provide? So if you're a small company and, you lose access to corporate email for a day or two, is that something you're probably going to survive and be able to keep churning? Most likely. But, if you're talking about a production floor at a manufacturing facility, the cost and the loss from having something like that is completely different. So what we're going to talk about first is a little bit about this year's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. CISA has a new theme. It's going to be referred to as Secure Our World. It's going to be an overall messaging campaign that's looking at the role individual users play both at home and in businesses to keep things safe. When we talk about the greatest weakness, any thoughts on what the greatest weakness is in cybersecurity? People, yeah. So the last few Verizon data breach investigation reports this year, thankfully, has actually gone down to 74% of cyber attacks involved the human element. It previously was as high as 95%. So, we can have good technology that does everything we ask it to, including things like MFA, which we'll hint onto as well. But if someone can socially engineer the human element to trick you to providing that PIN code that was just texted to you, have we really done a whole lot? So it's always going to start with the human element, and there are steps that, we can all take that will help secure. So the, next area on that I want to hit would be, really what is cybersecurity and the goal on this. So the overarching theme here is security of technology. So if you're in a business where you're rolling out a technology stack, if you're building a network, the recommendation is always start with security. Build it in from the start. If we have, the ability to add something that's going to add more convenience or efficiency to a process within the environment, fantastic. But if it's going to be connected to the internet, the first question should be, can we do this securely? So as an example of just, where we all sit and how we all play a role, is anybody familiar with the DDoS attack against Dyn DNS around 2016? A few head nods. So, that was, I think they've been rebranded, renamed, major DNS domain name server provider that was actually located in New Hampshire. They had a DDoS attack against their infrastructure, distributed denial of service, so flooding them with traffic. That took down a large swath of the internet, including companies like Amazon, New York Times, big companies. Any idea what did that? What were those devices? So it was the Mirai botnet. And the Mirai botnet is a botnet that goes around and harvests vulnerable devices that have default credentials enabled. So what took down half of the internet, anybody have a home refrigerator that connect to? Yeah, your home refrigerators, your microwaves, any of those smart devices that come with default credentials took down half of the internet. So something as minute that we may think at home is never going to play in the grand scheme of things. In that case, it absolutely did. So it's really, one of those things. If you are starting a business, take the lesson learned on default credentials. If you have, a router or something and you turn it over and there's credentials on the back, consider changing that. Most concerning would be if it's something that's default. So if you have an admin that's more than just default on your individual device and default across all devices from that manufacturer, using pretty readily available open source tools, those can be found by adversaries and leveraged, to really harm others. So the so what in cybersecurity, it seems intricate, but its core, again, it's all people, and it starts with all of us. So regardless of whether you're in cybersecurity or your director, it's one of those areas where it's the weakest link, and people are always going to be the greatest vulnerability. So just a couple of statistics as a scene setter on where we are currently. So approximately 33% of individuals create unique passwords for all accounts. Pretty understandable why that's an issue. So if you have a business and you haven't had a breach, are your credentials on the dark web? Any guess? Okay. Yeah, that is absolutely something where they can end up on the dark web. A good example would be something like MyFitnessPal. So, everybody uses it, common application. If you're an employee at a company, you got to log that bologna and cheese sandwich you had for lunch. So you're going to sign up with your company account, and then you're going to have access to it. So when an application that's widely used like MyFitnessPal is breached, what's your username? Your email address. And the password that's being reused across all different accounts is also there paired with your email address that you use for business purposes. So a lot of times that can be used for what we call credential stuffing, is taking good credentials and using them in other systems. So if it's a personal email address that you're using, or you're just on an ISP address, I can venture to guess you probably have an Amazon account. I don't think there's people that don't. So reusing those same credentials on Amazon, probably going to get me somewhere. If you're in an area where there's only a handful of banks, you can probably guess what bank you're part of too. So just having that idea of unique passwords for all accounts is very important. 43% had never heard of multi-factor authentication. 92% actually did state that they did take cybersecurity more seriously and were able to take change in behavior after doing some training. So one area that strongly recommend for all organizations is having periodic cybersecurity awareness training. There are free courses from CISA. There are free courses from other vendors out there. The statistics would tell you that you'll see a reduction of 60 to 65% in risky user behavior just by periodically training your users. So the ones that we want to hit on, and this whole idea of just, this is a lot, it's overwhelming, who can I trust, where do I start? We just want to start with 4 basic areas that everybody can do that hopefully is not too overwhelming. When we talk about cybersecurity, our adversaries are opportunistic. 95% of adversaries are after financial gain. Now, if you're in the defense sector and producing that very small, very specific part for some defense apparatus, someone maybe have aspirations other than financial gain in targeting you. And that's a different discussion. But the majority of us are going to be, they're hitting financial gain. And it's going to be targets of opportunity. So the same thing we've always heard about, you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than the slowest person running from the bear. Same kind of idea. We're talking layers of defense. Every incremental step we take in terms of securing the environment makes us just a little bit more unattractive of a target, and our adversaries go, you know what, this one is just not worth it. Let's move on. So the first 4 areas we're going to talk about: using strong passwords, a password manager, multi-factor authentication, recognizing and reporting phishing attacks, and updating software. So a couple thoughts on passwords and where we need to sit with that. We want to have passwords at least 16 characters. I know this sounds quite burdensome, but when we talk about things like password managers or we talk about things like passphrases, it's a little bit less burdensome. So right now, when we're talking about using software for brute force attacks, which a brute force attack generally revolves around a set of commonly used credentials. So right now, the most common password is password 123. If you have a help desk right now, they most likely would be setting your password to autumn 2023, something along these lines, where these are very commonly used passwords, and it's going to try those in an automated fashion. So in that spirit, longer passwords are always going to be more difficult to crack, whether it's a hash password that someone's trying to decrypt or just brute force. There's 2 ways that really make them random. That's using random string of characters and letters, as well as potentially a memorable passphrase. If you're not using a password manager, this is what most people do. If you have a favorite book or you have a song, it shouldn't be the first line out of A Tale of Two Cities or something that is very commonly used. But that series of things where it's memorable, but it's also long, very good. We'll hit a little bit on password managers as well. So when we talk about password managers, the benefit of this is you don't have to remember. So think of a vault. Anybody using password managers right now? Okay, so I guess I'm preaching to the choir here. So if you do have a password manager, we won't hit exactly what it is because we have enough people here using them. Is turn on MFA on those. So it's a risk-based decision. If your password manager has the ability to generate truly random passwords, use it. If it's one of those things where you can generate the maximum length, there's nothing hurting that. You don't have to remember the password. Depending on the system you have, it could actually input it in the field, which is another conversation for you. But using the truly random generation of a password is, again, going to make that much, much harder to crack. In terms of what you can use for a maximum, most websites are going to give you an idea. So if you have a bank account, it's going to tell you it has to be between these lines. If it's between 12 and 80, don't do 12. Do 80, or at least far more than 12. Systems like I'm a Proton Mail user. I think my password is 192 characters, but I don't have to remember it, but it's never going to get cracked. So the big thing with password managers and why they're good, you don't have to remember it. The major concern, though, is if someone does gain access to your password manager, they have the keys to the kingdom. It's game over at that point. So if we're going to use a password manager, recommendations are to do your due diligence. There is a password manager that has had a number of compromises in the last few weeks, and I'm sure most people are aware of where that is. Is that, really the company you want to be using? If you have a password manager, are those passwords stored locally, or are they on a cloud infrastructure hosted by your password manager provider? All questions that really, should be explored to see if that's a good fit for you. Additionally, it needs to be secured with multi-factor authentication and a strong password. Once someone has access, they have access to everything you have. So using, whether it's a YubiKey or an authenticator, whatever your password manager allows you to have for multi-factor is absolutely critical in making sure that stays secured. So the next area is multi-factor authentication. It sounded like that got hit on earlier, so I'll just hit the tenets of that real quick. There's 3 different pools that we can pull out of. For multi-factor, we need at least 2 out of the 3. So that's something you are, something you have, something you know. So something you know, password. Anybody something you have?
Fingerprint.
Fingerprint, not the fingerprint. I heard a cell phone. Yes, not the best, but yes. YubiKeys, anybody familiar with a YubiKey device or other physical token? Yes. So that would be another example, something you have with you. So if somebody's trying to log on overseas using your username and password, it's a physical device that needs to be plugged in. They're not going to have that device with them. That's also one of the strongest forms of multi-factor authentication because it's not something you can phish. If I want to trick you into saying, hey, send me over this PIN code you're going to get via text message or whatever's showing in your authenticator app, I might be able to convince you of that, but I can't convince you to electronically send me a physical token. And the last one, something you are. I heard fingerprint earlier. Something you are is a fingerprint or biometric. So could be the way you walk, a gait. It could be an iris scan. It could be a fingerprint. Apple's Face ID would be an example of a biometric. And something is a password. So we often hear these get conflated, though. So if you have a password and then a password, that's what we refer to as sequential authentication. That is not multi-factor authentication. So the recommendation would be to have MFA enabled for, as broadly as possible. So the big areas, though, if it's, where do we hit? So if you're a smaller company and you're just like, I just don't have the resources to get every single person on MFA, it comes back to this whole idea of finding where the most critical areas are. Where are you going to suffer the loss that you can't come back from? So if we're really looking at who's going to be targeted in a phishing campaign, you're generally talking CEOs, presidents, people that work in finance. Who's got the good stuff that's going to lead to money? And start prioritizing a role there. And maybe we can't hit everybody, but I sure as heck can take care of myself. I can get my finance person. I can have whoever does banking on multi-factor authentication and take it, in a more incremental step. The next area is recognition and reporting of phishing. So phishing scams are obviously online messages that are made to look like they're coming from a trusted source. Opening those, clicking on links, opening attachments are all ways that malware can get into your environment. So recognition of what a phishing email is important. So when we're talking about phishing email, most things that you're going to read on there, look for bad spelling. Look for Prince of Nigeria. If you're old enough to remember that kind of thing, you send me a few $1,000s and I'll send you back the 1.5 million. Or I'm stuck in the airport with your money I can't clear. I need the customs fee. Still happens, but it's not a coverall. There's much more sophisticated campaigns out there written in perfect English that would fool just about anybody. So the recommendation with recognizing and reporting phishing emails is look at it like you're having a conversation with somebody. So it's the social engineering aspect that is across any area of security. So instead of just, again, grammar, spelling, look at things like fear, urgency, doubt, financial reward. So most phishing emails you're going to get are going to tell you, you need to take this action now. If you don't click this link right now, your Amazon package for Christmas is not getting delivered. If you don't click this link now, you're going to get locked out of your account. That urgency is something you're going to find is a common theme because the more time you have to sit back and think and look and go, this doesn't look right, the less likely you're going to be clicking on that email or opening that phishing attachment. Same thing with the fear aspect. Again, you're going to get locked out. You will not get paid. You will lose this amount of money. You will lose this account. Common themes, when we feel those kind of emotions, that's really the area where it's worth a second choice. So the additional areas on phishing that we want to take a look at is, what do we do when we get them in a small business? If you have an IT service provider or you have an in-house IT team, you want to talk to them about it. When in doubt, don't click. If there's a report phishing box that you can get to your IT team and click that and send it over, that's always going to be your best bet. Recognizing phishing, especially if you're in an organization that is handling money, probably not the only person that's going to get that in your company. So notifying your managed service provider, notifying your IT team, hopefully they can take some steps that will hopefully prevent delivery to other people within the company. So the last one here of the 4 basic steps is updating software. So anybody ever get the Windows prompts, update your software now? And I'm sure everybody's hit the please remind me later button and then continues to hit the please remind me later button. Updating software in a timely manner as fast as possible is really, really critical, especially when we're dealing with systems that we have, if we're talking about remote access software. So, as an example, part of my role is also working with critical infrastructure organizations that have credentials compromised or potentially right on the cusp of having ransomware detonated in their environment. I dealt with an environment where it was a hospital that had Citrix for their remote access solution. Ransomware gang had the credentials to be able to access that environment. We're making the notification, hey, these credentials are out there. They're going to use them. They're passing them back and forth right now. And the hospital's response was, well, we patched that. Okay. Just because you patched it. Well, how long was the time from that vulnerability was out there to when it was actually exploited by the actors? In this case, they patched in a pretty reasonable time frame, 3 days. And those credentials were still breached and still out there. So the timeliness of updates is really, really important in terms of ensuring that vulnerabilities being actively exploited by criminals are taken care of and addressed immediately. If you're responsible for your own patching in your environment, CISA recently put out what we call our KEV. It's the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. So these are vulnerabilities that we have information that there's one, a remedy available, two, it's been assigned a tracking number, and three, it is actively being exploited by criminals, most likely for ransomware. So that if you're looking for where to prioritize, that is one of those areas. So where do we get software updates? Especially if we're talking about mobile devices and you're relying on tablets for day-to-day work, we kind of have the idea of, well, I set it to automatic update. It's going to auto-update. Well, if you really believe that, take a look at your iPhone, go to software update, scroll down, and there's one more there much more often than would generally think. So applying automatic updates where possible, but also double checking, seeing if there's available updates. Keeping an eye on notifications. So if you get one of those Windows prompts of, hey, this needs to be updated, update it. If you use things like Apple devices, they've recently started a program now where you'll get a little context on an update. If you need to defer one, maybe if it's feature-based and you don't need that feature, okay. But if they're calling out, this is a security update, this has immediate patching in it, that's something where you want to do it as soon as possible. So the overall idea that, these basic practices and it's human behavior that's the greatest threat to cybersecurity. I just want to hit the idea of cybersecurity in a small business should start with a culture. Again, the whole concept that everybody from the top down believes in cybersecurity. If someone receives an email and goes to leadership and goes, I'm not quite sure about this, if they get an email from the president or CEO of the company about buying Apple gift cards, you want them to have the confidence that they can go up to you and go, did you really send this? I've never seen you use Apple gift cards before. This sounds weird. But if they're met a couple times when they see a phishing email with, yeah, you should be able to recognize that. No, that is a legitimate email. I told you I send stuff from my phone. We're kind of quelling people from being able to openly say, I'm not sure about this. And that's going to result in people clicking on things that are going to result in, ultimately malware. So identifying training resources, there's a ton of free ones out there. Again, we're talking 60 to 65% reduction in risky behavior online. Everybody's on very tight margins with time and resources. If it's 30 minutes to take the cybersecurity awareness training, I'm going to bet you over the course of the first 2 years, you're going to get more than 30 minutes of productivity extra from that person where you're not going to be calling in your cyber insurance or incident response from them clicking on a phishing email. It's that whole culture of we're going to do things securely from the start. Once the horse is out of the barn, it's really hard to put that back in. So next area I want to hit on is just some free resources available from CISA. So the overall theme, though, for small businesses is that risk out there in the cybersecurity realm it's very high. It's there's opportunistic areas where criminals are just looking. So if you have finance, if you're backed by cyber insurance and you don't have the resources to commit to a ton of security, you're a prime target. And that's why small and medium-sized businesses are hit on a very, very regular basis. I've pulled a couple statistics up here. At one point in time, 50% of small or medium-sized businesses had been the victims of a cyber attack. 60% of those went out of business within 6 months. So we're talking about, really dire odds here of, if we really need to prevent the attack from happening rather than just look at survival after the fact. Insurance is great. If you have them and they're going to come in and they're going to rebuild your network, fantastic. But if you're talking about, I need my data back from someone that's ransomed my environment, even if you pay that ransom, the statistics would tell you you'll get about 60% of your data back. So you're still talking about a pretty monumental loss. 68% of small businesses reported being a victim of a cyber attack more than once. So, once you've had that initial attack, especially if you've had data leaked on the dark web, you've got a bullseye at this point in time. Again, we're talking criminals are lazy and opportunistic. Same idea. If you've been broken in once and that front door is already knocked in, you're going to keep having people go, they must pay, this must be easy, and it's going to continue. And the last area is, where we're going in terms of costs for small and medium-sized businesses. In 2013, the average loss for a business was about $8,700. Fast forward to today, an average impact on an organization with fewer than 500 is $3.3 million. So that is not saying you're paying a $3.3 million ransom, but if you have a ransomware attack and you're in manufacturing and production and you can't manufacture or produce, you're talking about not being able to produce product, not generating revenue for fairly long period of time. So kind of what we're talking about for where the environment is with small businesses. The other area that I really hit on with small businesses is contracts. So if you have vendors, service providers, whether they're IT, whether they're billing, anybody with access into your environment should have a contract with them. So one of the most common areas that we see for initial vectors of ransomware attacks is use of vendor credentials. So we all saw recently, probably in the news, Johnson Controls was an example of major breach. HVAC systems, very, very common across buildings in the US. When we talk about other vendors with access into your environment, they should have requirements in your contract. So as an example, if you have a shared set of credentials for your billing provider and they have 5 employees that access your system, they should be providing you notice that, hey, one of these guys just left. And that way you can change those credentials. There's not somebody that shouldn't have those credentials that's still out there. Why this is a real issue? The DOJ had an indictment that was published not too long ago where a SCADA integrator, so somebody that works on the physical technology controls of water systems, had terminated an employee. The employee was servicing a water facility in California, was not happy with the situation, decided, well, these credentials are still good, and I'm going to take out all my frustration on that California water facility. So that kind of requirement, notification of employees' departure that has access to your credentials, a requirement to meet the cybersecurity standards of your organization. So one of the first couple policies you should have is an acceptable use policy for use of equipment on your environment. So all that does sounds complicated. It's really just spelling out, if you are using my business's equipment, here's what you can use it for. Here's what you cannot use it for. Anybody with access to your environment should be playing under those exact same rules. They shouldn't be connecting to your network using the iPad that their kids play games on. So just a couple areas, really looking at those contracts and looking at liability. Last one being, if you have a vendor with access to your environment, they should be notifying you with any risk-informed time frame, ideally 24 to 72 hours, if they've had a breach on their end. So if they have access to your network and your credentials for access are saved on their computer, which has been compromised, you now have potentially a logical pathway from lateral movement into your network. So again, those kind of requirements are very key. If you have a vendor breached that ends up being the initial vector into your environment and ends up infecting your environment without those contract kind of requirements, you are going to get a response of, I'm the victim here. Someone compromised me. It's not my fault. And it's going to be really hard to, try to hold them accountable. Next area is looking at things from the physical cyber convergence. And I have my colleague John Warren that will talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Rick. That's good. Afternoon, everyone. So 2007, 2008, an organization called the National Protection and Programs Directorate started hiring security specialists to go around and look at critical infrastructure, 85% of which exists in the private sector. And we would tell them about options to consider to improve security, locks, windows, alarms. And through those assessments, we would see IT hubs and we would see servers. Fast forward to 2019, the agency was rebranded as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We started hiring probably 10 years too late. The really smart people in the room are cybersecurity advisors. And we had this recurring theme that we'd be out conducting these security assessments and looking at the physical security of an installation. Important, right? We don't have a whole lot of cyber attacks yet that have killed kids in schools. So physical security was huge on those lists. I came from Connecticut, where we unfortunately went through Sandy Hook, spent 2 weeks in the Emergency Operations Center, reacting and working towards that. Physical security was a big deal, really big deal. But we'd be out in these critical infrastructure areas. We'd walk by server farms. We'd walk by IT hubs. We'd take a look. How do you protect this room? Well, we've got a camera out front. We've got a door lock on the room. Do you have a fire suppression system? Is it gonna hose your server farm with water? We started asking some of those questions. Then a new term kind of peered into our lexicon called convergence. That area, you all remember the movie Ghostbusters, where you never cross the streams, right? Well, in this case, there's a certain level, there's a certain area where the physical and the cyber streams cross. Those critical cybersecurity resources that you have, your server farms, your IT hubs, and we started to talk about, are they being protected to a level that's going to keep you in business? So, whole bunch of lights flashing on the servers, a bunch of fans in the background. The room's a little bit chillier than everywhere else in the facility. We didn't spend a lot of time on the physical security side talking about what went on there. Rick and our cybersecurity teams do. But they started asking, great, servers are doing what they're supposed to do. All the patches are applied. Everything is as it should be. They've got emergency power sources backing them up. But the room's open to every employee in the facility. They all have prox cards that allow them entry. Without naming names, I've been in some high school districts. I'm a central and western Massachusetts protective security advisor. A lot of schools used infrastructure just like we did in the military. We used old janitor's closets, and we hung racks of switches in those closets because it was available square footage without thinking about the old plumbing lines in the building that ran right over them. So the convergence piece of this is where we take a look. I'll follow Rick tomorrow into a school district, and he will address all the cybersecurity concerns that he's been briefing up to this point. And while I'm listening to that discussion, I'm also taking a look at what physical security effects do you have on those cybersecurity nodes? Can we walk alongside of the building and see the network fiber or cable that comes into the building 8 feet off the ground where somebody could disable the entire network by cutting the cable? If you're a high school, you don't have to phone a bomb threat in Friday when you're trying to get out of a test. You can just, you just abolish the network for the weekend and go home and not have to worry about it. So, 74% of cybersecurity breaches involve some level of human element. It's not always the It's not always the employee that didn't know any better. Some of these are done with some level of intent, and we try and take a look at where those two streams cross. Where are your highly critical cybersecurity nodes, and what is the level of protection that surrounds them, that layered security that Rick has been talking about? If you have it at your front door, you're also going to need it where your critical IT nodes are. That's pretty much the area that we call convergence, and Rick dragged me along to brief the one slide. So, thanks, Rick.
Thanks. So a couple common areas when we're talking about small business. Again, if you have the public coming into your facility, this is a real consideration that is often overlooked. So whether it's a dentist office or small restaurant, the number of times I've walked in and just seen a router sitting right on the table in the waiting area is pretty high. Anybody with a Ethernet cable and a laptop can plug right in there while they're waiting on there. And if you've got your billing server connected and everything's on one flat network, if you have someone that does not care for your business, it's really a risk that you want to consider. If you have an electronic badging access system, anybody hear of the Flipper device? So very small little orange device created by a couple Russians for sale for about $170. This is something that it's a multi-purpose device, but one of the aspects is you can clone RFID and NFC badges. You need to be within 3 to 6 inches away, so even just brushing by, if your badge is susceptible to being cloned, it'll retain the information, hold it against the badge reader, and it'll act like it's your badge, and it will let somebody in. And in my experience, it works about 85% of the time. So unless you have a very advanced electronic security system, just something to consider. It's about 50 cents for an RFID blocking badge holder. If you're relying upon those kind of things, again, just the physical security aspect of technology is really understated. So last couple areas on just some free resources on here. The question often, whether you raise your hand or not, you're starting off with cybersecurity. It's where do I start? Where do I begin? So CISA developed what we call our Cyber Essentials Starter Kit. And this is really trying to break it down into bite-sized pieces for leadership of small and medium-sized businesses. If I'm going to work off of limited budget and I'm starting from ground zero, this guide is exactly where you want to have. So one of the slides will be posted afterwards. The image right here will be linked to that starter kit right there. There's also a number of free cybersecurity tools and resources. In our role in defending critical infrastructure, we've provided a living repository of free tools. So these are government tools as well as private sector tools that are made available. There are a lot of major cybersecurity companies that put out free resources just for small and medium-sized businesses and public companies, just because they want to ensure that you're able to thrive when you're not able to pay. So I recommend taking a look through that as you're, again, prioritizing investment. See how far free will take you, and then, invest the money wisely when you don't have free resources available. Last slide here is just what we do within the state. So depending on your place in critical infrastructure, this is a pathway I've put together of free resources that are out there for critical infrastructure organizations within New Hampshire. We do on-site security assessments, as Mr. Warren alluded to, looking at both physical and cyber infrastructure. We're looking at ransomware readiness, so your backups, are they immutable? How frequently are they occur? Are they tested? Have you tabletop exercised your incident response plan? If you have proper governance and policy, as well as just baseline cybersecurity goals that everybody should have in place. The next area is our vulnerability scanning service that's open for anybody. So if you have a static IP address, so if you're on Comcast Business or anything that's going to get you a single static IP or multiple static IPs, you can sign up for this service. This is using Nessus Pro, and it's a continuous service scanning your environment at least on a weekly basis. You'll get a report every Monday. So when we talked again about the whole update your software, this is one of those assessments that's continually looking to see if you did not update your software on something that's facing the internet. And it will key you in on that. If you have a vulnerability that is actively being exploited by criminals and still has not been patched, we scan every 6 hours for that. And you will get a phone call saying, hey, you got this out here. You might want to do something about it. Nessus Pro is a software we use. It's our vulnerability scanning service. Vulnerability scanner or Nessus? Nessus, Nessus. If you are a small business, it is quite pricey to run by yourself. So it's about $4,000 a year license. And then the last area are just some free resources that are out there for anybody. So cyber and physical tabletop exercises, very, very strongly recommend these to do with your whole team, at least on an annual basis. We have situation manuals already developed. It's literally insert name of organization here, and we'll walk you through a mock ransomware attack. And you can really start to say, okay, well, if this happened here, how would we respond? What would we do? What's the next steps? Find those gaps and address them. We can address those in a non-emotional standpoint where our business is not on the line. We make much better informed decisions. Last area I want to hit is Microsoft 365 baselines. We're doing these for Google Workspace soon. So if you do have, Azure Active Directory and you're on a domain-controlled network, that is something strongly recommend running. As was discussed on the last panel session, these products are not as secure as they could be right out of the box. So our Microsoft 365 baselines is a series of PowerShell scripts that will actually go through and take a look at your security settings within the environment and provide recommendations of where you can get additional security benefit. So problem oftentimes is those settings are buried 3 or 4 layers deep. If you ever have an iPhone and you try to find something in your 6 menus deep, same idea. This automates that process for you. So that's a quick overview. This is contact information for myself and our physical security counterpart within the state. Anything we can do to be of assistance, we are here to serve you. And any questions I can answer?
Sure. So vulnerability scanning, you guys do that and NSA will do that?
Not aware of NSA doing that for free.
They have one for defense.
Okay.
So I'm curious about different.
I'm not familiar with NSAs. I know DCSA does a lot of work in that space. At least with ours, I can tell you it's Nessus Pro, and it's looking for vulnerabilities. It's also looking for misconfigurations. It's also looking at exposed risky services. So one other area that's commonly done is I want remote access to my computer at any point in time. I open up remote desktop protocol. 3389 is now out to the world, and every criminal that wants to hit your desktop is just right there using Shodan to find it. So it hits those 3 areas.
As far as public service announcements go, I guess what are your guys' initiatives for public service announcements? Considering you have the young generation that uses completely different media than an older generation, and both of those are probably the most vulnerable.
So we have everything across the board. We have a very robust social media presence on everything from Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn that puts out messaging. So Secure Our World is one of the most recent campaigns talking about steps the average person could take any day. Cybersecurity Awareness Month hitting that average user. For folks that are more technically inclined, we have our National Cybersecurity Alert System, or NCAS. That's a Gov delivery platform where basically any alert coming from CISA of here's a vulnerability being exploited, here's what China's up to, here's what Russia's up to, would be delivered via email. So there's really a pretty broad range across there. And then if there's certain populations, depending, if there's one you're interested in, I can get it over to you. But we put stuff together for, as an example, older generation using computers that have never used computers in the past. Here's how to be aware of somebody trying to social engineer you and wire you money, or have you wire them money, I guess. So there's a lot out there.
We even do a mini campaign coming into this time of year for online shopping safety. So we'll go out and we'll brief that. We'll have some recommendations how to protect yourself when you're out doing your holiday shopping online, because the trend has been significantly greater towards that than it has been, presence in stores. So that's more of a mini campaign for the time of year that we're coming into, Thanksgiving through the new year.
Any other questions?
Yes.
You mentioned password managers.
Yep.
And you did not mention one particular one. which is the one I use.
That it didn't reach.
And I'm just wondering, like, abandoned ship on that, or did they fix it? I mean,
It's a risk-informed decision. I mean, you're always talking about whatever they're going to put publicly. Every company has proprietary data, so you can only go off of what they're putting in the public. Personally, I use open source because you can kind of vet what's going on there a little bit better, but it's really a risk-informed decision.
Question. Did you say, I couldn't remember if I missed it earlier, but is there a location on the website where you can put in an app, a SaaS or some other software to determine like the vulnerability level of that particular application?
No, we don't have anything that I'm aware of along those lines. The vulnerability scanning is looking at what's externally facing the internet. So that would be a tool that you could, leverage again. If it's facing the internet, it's external facing, that would be scanned for vulnerabilities. If you're talking about doing something internal, like, if you're going to scan a SaaS application, you need the vendor's permission on it. But anything on your internal network, there's free tools out there like Nmap scripting engine, which you can do
like
yourself.
outside third-party rating system or anything that looks at those and says what their security level is?
No, nope. Unfortunately, I wish there was, but no.
Question?
So you mentioned something about RDT opening up a certain port for anybody to use once you open it up.
Yeah.
Now that's assuming that you're not using a firewall, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is pretty common, unfortunately. Really? Yes, there's a lot of organizations without firewalls, unfortunately. But still be aware of what's open on your firewall too. Thank you all very much. And any other questions, please come up.